Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. Today, I was thinking about this last night, specifically about what's going on in the world. And I wanted to play a game with you all. So, it's 2023, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see what's going on in the news right now. That it's a bad place to be. It doesn't matter if you're in the United States or anywhere else in the globe. It seems like there's a lot of political turmoil and that there's a lot of people that are just not happy. And you can understand why. The economy's in the toilet, inflation's on the rise. There seems to be unjust censoring of opposing viewpoints on some platforms. And I'm a big fan of the platforms that this is going on. And I say that for media, where we consume this type of media. But thinking about platforms made me think about something that one of my friends had said. Dan, who's a good friend of mine, was talking about, do you know how to use different types of guns? And that brings up a very good situation to talk about. Not a good situation to be in. But as we've seen, depending upon verdict that comes out in the world, there's a group of people that are willing to do bad things to normal everyday citizens. And while we all have our preferences towards a particular platform or a particular type of gun, or we have these images that we're going to be some sort of James Bondian badass when we actually have to use one of these, if we ever have to use one of these. So I picked two platforms. Technically I picked three, but I'm only going to talk about two for the sake of this. Now, I'm an AK guy, but I have an AR, and I have a G3, and I've had access to FALs, so I know how to use them. But I've also educated myself by checking out other videos. One of the coolest videos I remember seeing is done by Ian at Forgotten Weapons, where he was talking about how to disarm or how to unload these type of weapons, because if you're in a third world country and you're like Doctors Without Borders, that type of thing, how do you react when you have to unload one of these to make it safe so you can do the work you're doing? Worst case, how do you use one of these if you had to? And that's where I'm going. So, one of the biggest things about gun content creators is that they try to go cross-platform just to keep things interesting. But most of us creators have these platforms. And I remember a time and place where I didn't have an AR-15, but my buddy did. And I remember going shooting with them, and that's what I'm going to advocate for, is that you may not own all these platforms, but maybe you have access through them through another method. You know, go out shooting with your friends and family if they have some of these things, and that's a good plan. And why I'm saying that is, in my scenario, let's play this game. Some cop who's a turd, who isn't a normal cop, who has a chip on his shoulder, beat the heck out of someone, and either they died or they didn't, but there's a group of people that are now outside protesting this. And in today's political environment, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that it only takes one or two people to start the ball rolling for it going bad. I.e., look at Ferguson. I.e., look at what's going on in our world right now in Washington and Oregon, those so-called autonomous zones. They're trying to homestead on property that isn't theirs in the middle of cities that aren't theirs. So that's how I see that. But those riots seem to magically appear when you're not ready for them, is the best way to put it. We've seen cops, or not cops, we've seen people get exonerated after the fact, after they had to floor it to get out of a crowd that just magically materialized around them, and they weren't there for the protest or anything. They were minding their own damn business, like most good people would be. But this goes farther. How many times have you seen recently in the news events that there's been home invasions? In the Southwest, that's a big deal. Again, our response times are higher, usually because of geography. And again, I'm not advocating for law enforcement. I've long since given up on that when they oppressed us during the COVID stuff. But what happens if there's multiple people trying to break into your modest little home and you've done nothing wrong? It's time to be able to defend yourself and your family. What do you use? And in my little scenario, if this was a riot that just magically appeared outside, what would you do if, God forbid, they got away your weapon from your person? You know, their retention is a big deal. But if you're fighting 30 or 40 people, and yes, if they're unarmed, you've got an equalizer that would actually shift the fight closer to your side, is the best way to put it. But if you were to lose your weapon and you were to have to pick up another gun, would you know how it runs? You know, would you know how to make it run at bare minimum, or would you be able to run it like you need it as it to save your life? And that's why I brought up these two examples, because the right arm of the free world, the FAL, and the G3 are some of the most popular world rifles in the world. They're gaining popularity and have gained popularity for years in the United States. As prices have climbed, these have become more attractive because they're 308s. And if you're like me, you know, who's raised by boomer fuds, the 308's always been cool. But if you're open in big open areas and you can afford only one rifle, maybe this is it. Maybe you splurged on this or a SCAR or an AR-10. And I didn't cover the SCAR or the AR-10 like this because maybe you know how those work. But do you know how these work? Do you know how to charge one of these like a G3? Do you know how to charge a FAL? Do you know how to swap a magazine for either platform? What happens if you have a PTR and it's an older PTR, which is based on the G3, but it doesn't have the paddle release? Do you know how to get the magazine out? Do you know where the safety is? If you were in the wild and this is one of the weapons you came across because yours ran out of ammunition or something else, would you be able to service and repair one of these if you needed to make it run? Now that seems like a huge leap that we will never get to. The fact is, Murphy doesn't care what we think. And Murphy's an SOB when it comes to bad things and bad people. And this doesn't just go with rifles. It goes with shotguns. It goes with pistols. Any pistol or rifle or shotgun, any 2A device, do you know how to use it? Have you had any experience with one? This is why I'm saying in our community, where I know we are a community and we do have buddies that have different tastes than us, maybe it's worth buying a box of shells or lunch to go out with these guys and see if you can run the platform, to see if you can learn the ins and outs of it. At the very least, maybe check out Robski to see how an AK runs a certain way. Maybe check out Mr. Guns and Gear so you can see him run some of these, because he changes platforms like underwear. And thank God he does. Or Mac at Military Arms Channel. Mac will break it down all the time. He'll show you how these guns work. This was all before work, at least, before YouTube started going hard and heavy after gun creators. You know, Brandon Herrera has done more to get kids into the 2A than anyone else I know of. And why? Because he makes it fun. And he mirrors a lot of what the video game guys or video game crowd is. That's our newer generation of 2A people. And there's nothing wrong with catering to them. But making it fun, that's the whole point of the 2A, was we aren't sticks in the mud. We're approachable. That's, again, why I was talking about the gun shows yesterday, is be approachable. You don't have to be a jackhole to talk about guns, and your knowledge shouldn't be sacred, because maybe someone will correct you if you're wrong. And I'm wrong all the time. I mean, if you listen to my podcast, I stumble over my own words a lot. That's partially because of, some of the stuff I had been on for antidepressants, which are now not a thing for me. But in general, it brings up a very good point. I hope that we're never in a situation, any of us, that we have to drop a gun or have to use a gun that isn't ours because we're in a very bad situation, a life or death situation. But in that scenario, what would you do if you lost your primary platform? And for the sake of this argument, a platform is a barreled action of a rifle or a pistol, and how it works. Specifically, if you look at the AK, it is a long stroke gas piston system. Do you know what that means? Time to get some education. Do you know what direct impingement means for an AR-15? Again, these are things you need to know if you have to maintain it, and it helps understanding how the gun cycles and works. Because as we get farther down the road of society in 2023, you see things happening in places that I never thought would happen. The brutality we've seen in Tennessee and Memphis. Now, I know Memphis had been getting bad, but Tennessee's always been country boy territory. I would have thought that more than one of those people would have piped up and said, hey, no, you don't do that, even as a cop. And we're at a point in society where it's time to call people out and say no. And sometimes we may have to be lethal at doing that because they won't accept no as an answer. Free men don't ask permission. But do those free men and women understand what it means to be a responsible gun owner? Do you know about these other platforms? Because it is a big deal. If you take a Glock, say any Glock 17, Glock 19, and you're running that, but you had to run a 1911 or a Beretta 92, do you know the differences? Do you know what to do to keep the gun in operation to save yourself? And that's all I'm talking about with cross-platform domination. I like crossing the platform stuff, not because it's super exciting, but I learn something new all the time. I've learned that having a G3 is a good thing, a G3 style gun. They're reliable. They need some more maintenance than, say, an AK or even an AR. But they're very robust and they're very tough. And there's a reason why the militaries around the world are still using them. Same with the FAL. But do you know how they work? Because that's important. You can think of yourself as the ultimate zombie survivor. You've got a rifle with 10,000 rounds of ammunition for that one rifle. But what happens if that one rifle goes down? That's simply what I'm saying. Yeah, maybe you have spares, maybe you know enough to do this, but what if it is destroyed? You are somehow in a situation, in a car wreck or something, that either destroys the gun or bends it beyond repair, and you can find can you find a suitable replacement? And if you do, can you run that suitable replacement? More often than not in the United States, it's the AR-15. But I would say a short second to that is a Kalashnikov. And most people in the 2A community have both. And most people on the leftist side of the world will probably have the people that would be rioting probably have AR-15s or Kalashnikovs. They don't understand how to use any of these other guns. But like I said, in my scenario, the ball dropped, the world's popped off in a weird way, and you're having to go places you never wanted to be. Can you get out of it? You know, that's where my training regimen is to learn weapons, because I'm still a fan of Sonny Pazikis, who says, you know, the gun is just a tool. You are the weapon. And I'm working at perfecting my body, my mind, to be a weapon if I need it to be. But I'm interested in that type of stuff. And now that I don't work for a K-12, I can be the 2A guy I always have been everywhere else, but at work. Some thoughts for today on a Wednesday morning. Like, share, subscribe, rumble, be great.